Coming up on Chasing the Natty, Week 8 of the college fantasy football season is here, and Justin and I are back to help you be prepared as always. We'll be giving you guys a couple of players at each of the main positions that we are starting, a couple of whom will be sitting, and then we'll finish up with some of y'all's fan-submitted start-sit questions. We got a ton of great content ahead. We've got all of that and more coming right after this.
To go, breaks a tackle, he's 10, he's touchdown! Cook's gonna throw the deep ball, and Burton's past the defense! Touchdown, Luther Burton! Milrow gonna run it again, got a lane, kicked in the turbo, Milrow! Goodbye, touchdown Bama!
This is Chasing the Natty, a college fantasy football podcast. All right, welcome in everyone. This is Jared Palmgren, host of the Chasing the Natty podcast. I hope you guys are having a wonderful ride to your work on this Wednesday morning. We are the College Fantasy Football Podcast on the Campus of Canton Podcast Network. You can find us on all of your podcast feeds and on YouTube every Monday and Wednesday morning during the season at 6 a.m. sharp. If you want to support the great work we're doing here, head on over to campuscanton.com, subscribe there with one of our extraordinary tiers. You'll find everything you need for your CFF, Devi, C2C, betting, DFS needs, all of that, including articles, rankings, projections, tools, and even more than that. You can also find me and the show on Twitter. I'm at CFF_Jared. The show is at Chasing the Natty, and my partner in crime for these weekly previews is Mr. Justin Leo, aka Volume Pigs, at Volume Pigs on Twitter. You can find his fantastic content at volumepigs.com. Justin, welcome back to the show, man. How you doing?
Hey man, it's good to be back. You know, we're establishing a bit of a routine here now. This is 2 weeks in a row, so it's good to be back. I'm feeling like I'm getting back into form. So it's I'm excited to chat about some more CFF today.
Absolutely. Again, we're halfway through the full season. I know pretty much in most regular seasons for different leagues, we're looking at roughly about 2/3 of the way through. I'd say most people are, 3 to 4 weeks away from their first playoff game. So it's really crunch time, really making sure we got to get these wins over the next couple of weeks. Nothing worse, is it, Justin, than when you have a team that seems like it's really, really good, and then suddenly in the second half of the season, things just kind of start falling off the rails for whatever reason.
Oh yeah, well, and that kind of thing does tend to happen quite a bit in CFF. There's a lot of guys who in September are one kind of player, and then once conference play kicks off, so there's an element of that. There's also just CFF randomness out there. So
True.
Understandably, yeah, that is a very frustrating thing, and it happens quite frequently.
Well, we're here to make sure that does not happen to y'all with our sit, start, and preview shows here. For those of you who are just tuning in at this point in the season, maybe you are somebody who's just found us at this point. Basically, we have 3 segments on the show. We do our starts, which are players outside the top 60 to this point in the season, guys that you can regularly find still available on the waiver wire or free agent market, I guess, at this point, because waivers have already run. You can still pick up for free right now, plug them in for this week. Guys that we are sitting, some guys that maybe you are relying on week to week that maybe we don't love the matchup as much this week. And then we finish it up with some of y'all's fan-submitted start-sit questions that kind of help you guys give an idea as to what our processes are whenever we are considering start-sit scenarios. If you want to get involved with that, you want your start-sit questions answered on the show, make sure you're following the at Chasing the Natty account on Twitter. I post a weekly tweet there every single Monday, usually around lunchtime, and that's where you can put your questions in to be answered on the show. All that being said, Justin, I say we hop right on into it with our sits and starts for the week. But before we get to that, I actually have our results from last week, Justin, for our starts and sits, to see how well we did. And I think we'll do, rather than doing like cumulative, kind of how I did it last year a little bit, I think I'll just do, win-loss. So like if I get more points, or if I win on the starts, I get a win there. You get a,
okay.
You get what I mean. So anyway, recapping last week, your starts were Caden Samoza, Demi Sumo, and Caden
Yeah,
Prather.
tough.
My starts were Seth Hennigan, Rasul Faison, and Justin Lockhart. And the lesson here, Justin, is that we got to do better. We got to kick it up a notch here. My players average 15.57 fantasy points per player. Your guys average 13.93. I don't necessarily think that was your fault. Samosa just not getting touchdowns sucked against Kent
I was
State.
just gonna say, so I think Simone's has single-handedly tanked me, and wide receiver was a strange one because I think I had Caden Prather initially, then I talked about Raylan Sharp, but I
Oh
think
yeah, I
they both
forgot about
scored like
that.
they
Yeah,
both scored I think like around the
yeah,
same. So
yeah. So yeah, we
yeah,
gotta do better this week. And I'm looking at our guys here. I think we'll do better. And then our sits. This is where we did a little bit better. I had Sam Levitt, I had Quali Conley, and I had Jacoby Jones out of UMass, and you had Dylan Gabriel, Damon
oof.
Claiborne, and Noah Short. Claiborne is short. You nailed. I mean, 6.2 points, 4.2 points. Like you absolutely nailed that. And then, to be fair, I never expected Gabriel to have 30 points against Ohio State.
Gabriel had his best game of the season.
Exactly. All he did was just go out and show out against, probably the top defense in the country. So
Turns out,
no
turns
biggie.
out Oregon was just holding back a bunch of their stuff, and Evan Stewart all of a sudden has a great game. Dylan Gabriel has a great game. So yeah, it's that's one of those things. It's tough, but yeah, certainly on the other two, I think it was a little bit better. But to be fair, I feel like Noah Short could have easily like that game. There were so many points scored. It just happened to go, to other players. But that's part of the problem with Service Academy players. You're only touching the ball a few times. It might not be their number called. But yeah, Dylan Gabriel, that one was tough.
I'm just trying to imagine you at home, Justin. Like you're seeing the score notifications come over your phone every time it's an Army player. You're like, oh, please don't be Noah Short. Don't be Noah Short. Don't be Noah Short. As like 7, 8
Well,
touchdowns come through.
I was watching it because one of my opponents in a different league had the quarterback Daly, and Daly was basically scoring all the
I
touchdowns. And I
would
was just
say
like, you know
my
what? I just
condolences.
like it. Yeah, I actually just prefer if like Noah Short would just take a hand off himself and score for a change. Like somebody else can score. But yeah, no, we will do better this week. Attempt to at least.
I agree. I think if we can get to a point where our sits are averaging less than 10 points and our starters are averaging over 20 points, I think those are like our great weeks. So let's make it happen here. Let's go to our starts for this week. Justin, I'll throw it over to you first, man. Who is your quarterback outside the top 60 in quarterbacks at this point in the season that you are starting this week?
Yeah. Well, and I feel like of all the positions for this exercise, quarterback, at least this week, was the toughest for me for making this
Really?
this my decisions. Again, for the audience, the exercise is choosing a player outside the top 60 in fantasy points scored. So there are plenty of other players I'd like to start over Svoboda this week, but matching the criteria, I think he's a guy who is somewhat interesting to me. So one of the things I'm looking at, so one of my lessons last week is, I picked Caden Simones and I bet on him scoring 3 passing or more touchdowns, understanding he had no rushing upside. And that kind of reared its ugly head last week because he gave nothing on the ground. He only scored once. Day was over, basically. This time around, I'm going to try to switch up the strategy a little bit. Sabota is a different kind of quarterback. He's had double-digit rush attempts, I believe, in 4 of his last 5 games, something along those lines. He scored, I think, like 4 rushing touchdowns in his last 4 games, something along those lines.
5 rushing
Um,
touchdowns in his last 4 games.
Even better. So 5 rushing touchdowns in those last 4 games. So he's a different style of quarterback than Simonza. He has that dual threat sort of ability. In the matchup this week, they're playing San Jose State. San Jose State, there's nothing really in particular numbers wise that stands out in one direction or the other. They're pretty middle of the pack in the FBS. So this is a game where okay, the matchup seems fine. Sabota, I like his dual threat sort of usage. As far as how much actual scoring is going to happen in this game, again, Wyoming's one of those offenses where okay, it's a bit of a risk, but Sabota potentially could be involved with dare I say 3 touchdowns, one of them rushing. That's what we're hoping for here. So yeah, again, it was slim pickings this week, but I think Sabota, if I'm looking for a player outside that top 60, I can kind of sort of formulate some logic of how he could have a good game this week.
Yeah, I can definitely see it. Again, Vegas isn't super favorable on this. The total on this game's
I didn't
50,
think they would be.
50 and a half. San Jose State's favored by 11 and a half. So again, doing the math off the top of my head, that's, giving roughly room for 3 touchdowns from Wyoming there, which I would say is better
Mhm.
than most weeks we would really expect out of Wyoming. I mean, shoot, the last I mean, here's their scoring in every game they've had this year: 7 against Arizona State, 13 versus Idaho, 14 versus BYU, 17 versus North Texas, 19 versus Air Force, and then they actually scored their season high this past week against San Diego State, excuse me, with
Mhm.
24. So technically, we are actually seeing them increase their point total every single week. And so I do think that maybe that potentially is a point in your favor there. And like you said, San Jose State, their defensive numbers here aren't anything to write home about, right? They're pretty much dead in the middle in terms of total
Yeah.
defensive performance at 67, but their rushing is 87th, which isn't like, terrible, but it's not good either. And so I think
No.
that, Svoboda can absolutely take advantage of that there as well. So I like the call.
Well,
I like the high floor with his rushing.
no, and one last thing that I think might surprise people is Sabota has attempted over 30 passes twice in his last 4 games as well. So, people might not be expecting that out of the Wyoming QB. But, I mean, if you combine his rushing usage on top of his passing attempts, I mean, he's actually getting quite a bit of looks each game. It's just that, they're not very efficient. But he has scored 20 points or more. I assume this is a 6 point passing touchdown
This is 4 point.
measurement.
This is 4 point
4 point.
yard.
Okay. Well, he has scored 20 points or more, I think, in 3 of his last 4 games then. So, he's trending upwards. Again, we'll see. We'll see what happens this weekend.
I will say you're pointing out those pass attempts here. You're kind of burying you're burying the body here of his completion percentage being sub 50% in every game but one so far this
Oh,
season.
it's terrible. Yeah, it is terrible. But hey, the usage is good. Okay. I mean, half of the equation is good. We're hoping for the efficiency that to catch up.
Agreed, agreed, agreed. All right, I'll throw out my quarterback here. This is a guy I talked about earlier this week on the waiver wire show. Actually, I talked about him on last week's waiver wire show, and I mentioned him again this week. But Spencer Petras, man, this is a real life version of the Vince McMahon meme where like he slowly is losing his mind more and more with each panel, right? That's how it's been being a Spencer Petras fan for fantasy over the last couple of weeks. I mean, he comes back after being out for a couple of weeks against Temple, 44 pass attempts, 293 yards, 2 touchdowns. You're like, okay, all right, the pass attempts are good. We can maybe get there on the production and touchdowns and everything. Very next week, 41 pass attempts, 372 yards and 3 touchdowns, and you're sitting there like, oh boy, wow, that all right. If he could just keep this up, this is a very relevant CFF asset here. And then against UNLV this past weekend, 59 pass attempts, 461 yards, and 3 touchdowns. He probably could have had another touchdown thrown in there as well. He also threw 3 picks, but we're not going to talk about that. All that's great. Is it crazy to say that his best matchup yet is coming this upcoming week against New Mexico? New Mexico's defense is absolutely atrocious on every level, right? They're bottom 3 in the country against the pass. They're bottom 5 in the or bottom 6 in the country versus the rush. Utah State's going to be able to name the score against New Mexico. And guess what? New Mexico's going to be able to do the same thing to Utah State because Utah State's defense is terrible as well. Culminating in this beautiful, beautiful Vegas total for this game of 78 and a half. I don't think I know for a fact that's the highest total we have seen this year given out by Vegas. It might be the highest I've seen given out by Vegas. I think there's probably a couple of USC games from maybe last year or the year before when Lincoln Riley's defense was an all-time bad. But in terms of a game this close where New Mexico is only favored by 2, so both of these teams are expected by Vegas to hit 40 points basically. I don't
Yeah.
think you can ask for a better matchup, and I think Petras could absolutely just light the world on fire this weekend.
Yeah, I like the pick. I think if I had gotten into the sheet earlier and was choosing my start this week, Peaches probably would have been my pick as well. So damn you, Jared, for stealing them from me on this. But no, it's a good pick. And yeah, that over under on the total is absolutely absurd. And it has me thinking about snagging some of the other players that might be involved in that game just to get a piece. But yeah, love that pick.
Agreed. And I mentioned it earlier this week with the two slot receivers there at Utah State, right? Where I'm paying
Mhm.
attention to whether Kyrese White is playing or not this week, right? Because he was looking good before he got hurt. And then last week, Hestera, when White went down, came right in and basically took over the role and had himself a phenomenal game. So I'll be very much keeping an eye on those guys. And then both Raylan Sharp and Jalen Moss should be fantastic for not. Or wait, what am I talking about? That's Fresno State. What am I talking about? I'm confusing all my Mountain West teams now. Forget what I'm saying. Let's move on to running backs. Justin, who is your
Sure.
starting running back for this week that's outside the top 60 at the position?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm sympathetic to you. We're at the point of the season where a lot of these teams start blending in together. For running backs, the name I'm selecting is UTEP's Zell Jolly, the Jolly Good Fellow, I like to call him. So, with Jolly and UTEP's offense and UTEP's team overall this year, they've not been very good. Let's
Nope.
let's be honest about that right from the jump. But Jolly, one of the things I do like about him, so he was injured, I believe, in week one against Nebraska. I think he played like a few snaps, didn't really do anything, and then he returned the week before last. And upon his return, 17 carries, also saw a target, which he caught. So that was 18 touches first game back. Next game back, which was this past weekend, 27 carries, two targets, caught both of them. So we're talking about 29 total touches there. I love his role and usage in the offense. In the offseason, this was a program, the staff where I was kind of snooping around, thinking, maybe Javon Jackson, who was the guy they brought over from Austin P, and had 250 carries under this staff last year. Sort of looking at that and thinking, okay, maybe Javon Jackson is the guy in this UTEP offense to sort of to highlight and to grab some shares of. He hasn't really been that great this year. He's not
Nope.
been efficient with his touches. And Jolly actually, he's looked better when he's been given his opportunity. And it looks to me that Jolly has just effectively taken over as the lead back role at UTEP right now. Um, and this week, and they're actually playing Wednesday night, so we're at that portion of the season now. We're midweek games, which is nice. But they're playing FIU, which in my mind is a great matchup, because FIU is one of the worst teams in the FBS in terms of rushing yards against, at least through 6 or 7 games so far. So this is one where I'm looking at the usage of Jolly, and if he's going to touch the ball 29 times, or let's just say 20 plus times Wednesday night against the FIU team that's pretty poor against the run, feels like he should be able to get 100 yards, hopefully a score or two along the way. So yeah, I like this play. I like Jolly. Hoping that the carries continue, and I'll be excited to see what he does against FIU.
Congratulations to all of you out there that are probably getting a sneak preview at next week's waiver wire column and show. Because, quite frankly, if he does again what he did the last 2 weeks this week, then he will be a must grab in for all formats next week. And the other thing that you kind of touched on there, Justin, is FIU's a terrible team in general, but it is funny just how Jekyll and Hyde their defense is. And what I mean by that is that their passing defense is actually one of the best in the nation, at least in terms of its performance so
Yeah.
far. Again, we'll see. You can point to who they've played so far, right? But in terms of like just their expectation or how they performed compared to their expectation, right? Their defense is doing their passing defense is doing extremely well. Their run defense is completely atrocious, which means when you got UTEP here, it basically forces them to run the ball if they want to have a chance in this game. And so I think that I agree with you. That is an incredible matchup for Jolly here. And I am very much on board with this. And also, quick dynasty note, which, by the way, if y'all are listening to this, the latest episode Defending the Natty with myself and Nate Marquise is out. We talk a lot of trades there, so go check that out. But also, quick dynasty note, Jolie, I'm so used to Justin Jolie. Jolly is a redshirt freshman. He's got after this year, he's got 3 years of eligibility left, and quite frankly, he is not an NFL size back. He is 6'1", 175. So you are potentially looking at a 3-year monster here in the CUSA if you don't go and grab him right now. So I probably will do that after I'm done recording with the show. Is go grab him in all the dynasty leagues if he's still
That's a good
available.
idea. Yeah.
So, um, yeah, we'll go to my running back here. I'm going with Elijah Gillum. This is a bit of a risk here, but we did get news that Malik Sherrod is being described as week to week, not day to day, and that tells me that he'll be at least out another week. You don't really describe guys as week to week when you plan them being available that very week. So that tells me this is Elijah Gillum's show this weekend against Nevada, and we know for a fact that with Sherrod out, it is Gillum's show, right? This past week against Washington State, Gillum 20 carries, 120 yards and touchdown, 4 catches, 8 yards. 3 weeks before that, against New Mexico, Sherrod was out again. Gillum 18 carries, 54 yards and touchdown, 4 catches, 15 yards. Now, obviously, I don't love that efficiency there, but regardless, the volume's there. He's going up against Nevada. They're 109th in the country in rushing team defensive performance here. I'm grabbing him off the waiver wire. He's rostered at only 4% of leagues right now, and I'm going to start him. I'm going to take advantage of that. If you like Malik Sherrod, this is a must grab.
Yeah, no, and I like this pick as well. With Gilliam, we saw, a preview of this. Well, he's already spelled Malik Sherrod a few times this year, but we saw this last year too, right? When
Yep.
Sherrod was missing games early on in the season, Gilliam was a hot name on the waiver wire, and he was good for, I think it was sort of 3 or 4 weeks there last year in the 2023 season. So we've seen this now, like, multiple times. It's not just a 1 or 2 game sample size. It's when Sherrod is out, Gilliam's undoubtedly the next guy up, and they do love to just funnel him carries and volume. So I like the pick, and Fresno State's got a pretty good matchup this week as well.
All right, Justin, let's move on to your wide receiver here. Which wide receiver outside the top 60 wide receivers are you starting this week?
Yes, sir. So I like the game. On Twitter, my handle's Volume Pigs, and in particular when it comes to CFF, these are the types of players that I really sort of get enthusiastic about. And what I'm talking about is players that get a lot of volume, a lot of carries, a lot of targets. So Trent Walker, Oregon State receiver, sort of an unknown name, certainly throughout the offseason and then into this season. But it might surprise the audience to know that he, in the last, 4 out of his last 5 games, has seen double-digit targets. Right, I'm looking at his sort of last 5 appearances against Nevada last week. 12 targets, he caught 7 of them, 96 yards and a score. That was good for about 19 points in half PPR formats. The efficiency or the yardage, I should say, or maybe even the scores, I should say, haven't necessarily caught up to or at least matched what you'd expect with the amount of targets that he's been seeing. Because again, double-digit targets 4 of his last 5 games, but in terms of his actual output in CFF, outside of this past weekend, his highest score was about 13 points. So, the CFF output isn't exactly, is not going to blow you away. But I do love that he's getting a lot of targets. He had a great game this past weekend. So, again, we're choosing wide receivers outside the top 60. They're playing UNLV this weekend. UNLV actually has a decent defense this year. But I like players that see lots of targets. If you're seeing that many targets, good things tend to happen. And they just had a good game this past weekend. So, we'll see because, Oregon State, one of those running backs, Jam Griffin, is injured. Not sure if he's going to play this weekend. They still have Anthony Hankerson. But I think that is going to sort of push them into leaning into the pass a little bit more. As they did this past weekend. And so, that's my pick. We'll see what happens. But I'm interested to see what happens with Walker for the rest of the season.
I agree with you that just investing in volume is a good way to go, right? Like that's where I tend to go when I'm during the off season. Like guys that I'm investing in later in drafts tend to be guys where I can see, what's my golden rule, right? If I can see a path to 100 targets on the season, to me, you're worth a shot, right? And the same thing goes here within the season. If I see a guy who's getting, 11 plus targets weekly, his efficiency hasn't been here yet. He hasn't hit 100 yards yet on the season because, again, Oregon State's quarterbacks are not in any way, shape, or form dynamic through the passing game. They're going to give him shorter targets, right? His ADOT's quite low, but... eventually that's going to break open a little bit. If not this year, then next year probably as well, when they kind of get some more experience underneath them. So I like the call here with Walker, especially in a PPR format. I think this is a fantastic call here. But standard, I'd be a little bit more worried because, again, like you not breaking 100 yards, only 1 touchdown so far this year. I think that's something to be slightly concerned about. But regardless, PPR format, I'm totally down with this. So, all right. Oh, I gotta do my wide receiver. Just realized. I'll do mine real quick. Again, I'm going with Eric Rivers, wide receiver out of FIU. We already kind of talked about this matchup a little bit, but Rivers is another one of these guys that he's kind of the opposite of Walker in a way, where his volume's a little inconsistent, but his production has actually been crazy consistent. Where between his last 4 games, he's finished between 95 and 101 yards in each of his last 4 games. Now, he's had targets of 6, 7, 13, 11, all a good amount, right? But it's not like Walker, where you're like, all right, pencil him, or you can write it in ink. He's going to get 10 targets this week, more than likely. But even so, I love that consistency in production there. I like the kind of 50-50 shot of getting a touchdown here. I think there's honestly better chance of him getting a touchdown. I am a little surprised by Vegas's total on this game at 48.5. Definitely on the lower side. I don't love going after that. But again, I look at UTEP's defensive performance this year. It hasn't been great. They're 118th overall, 118th versus the pass, 117th versus the rush. Like, FIU, theoretically, even though it's not a great offense, should be able to feature the guys that they need to in order to have a chance in this game. And so I think Rivers, as well as Patterson as well, both of them should be able to have a good time in this game. And especially in a PPR format, I think this is a very, very safe play. What do you think, Justin?
Yeah, no, I like the pick. And like you, I'm a little surprised about the over-under total from Vegas. I guess their thinking is because both quarterbacks on both teams are not phenomenal, but especially UTEP's. But I don't know. I mean, this one feels like, I mean, it's a Wednesday night game. It feels like one of those CUSA games that could go AWOL easily. I mean, it's just such a strange sort of matchup. FIU cannot stop the run, and UTEP, I doubt is going to be able to stop these receivers. So it feels like a game that could be great for CFF. And specifically, I do like that pick with Eric Rivers. He's been great this year as well. He's been consistently pretty good. So,
all righty, let's move on to our sits for the week. Again, these are guys that are all within the top 40 of their respective positions to this point in the season, which kind of leads to the caveat of, again, when we have that small of a player pool to pick from and everything, most of the time, especially once you consider all the players that are on bye week and everything like that, it leaves kind of limited options. And so some of our arguments here for why you should sit these players might sound like a little bit of a stretch, I will fully admit. But it's also just here to serve as a warning sign of like, hey, if you got better options, potentially consider sitting these guys and playing those safer options here. So I'll start with my sit, at quarterback. And I'm going Curtis Rourke, quarterback out of Indiana. He's going up against Nebraska this weekend. And Rourke's been pretty solid this year for the most part, right? I've been impressed with Kirk Cincinnati. I knew I liked Cincinnati's system. Like, don't get me wrong about that. But I am impressed by how they were able to get going in year one. Rourke's been incredibly consistent since week 1, 26, 28, 30, or 23, 25, 27 fantasy points. Just that constant, steady, no explosive games, right? But like, you're not losing your fantasy week because of Rourke, and he's been phenomenal for that. My problem is I'm worried about him this upcoming week against Nebraska. Nebraska, according to our numbers over at C2C Winning Edge, is 4th in the country versus the pass when it comes to pass defense team performance. And that's concerning to me because, again, that's clearly above any other team that Rourke has faced to this point. Outside, amongst the Power 4 opponents that Indiana has faced this year, they faced UCLA, who's 94th versus the pass in team performance, Maryland, who's 86th, and Northwestern, who's 68th. You throw Charlotte in there, they're 102nd in the country, right? And then all the way back in week 1, granted you could say it was week 1, they're still trying to find their legs. They faced FIU, who we were just talking about, right? They're their rushing defense is horrendous. Their passing defense is a lot better than people are kind of giving it credit for. And I think part of it is because of what they were able to do to Indiana in this opening game. Because in this opening game, Rourke finished the game with only 180 yards passing and a touchdown, finishing the day with easily his lowest fantasy output of 11.5 points. Now, granted, you can say Indiana, they got out of there quickly. They didn't have Rourke throw it around a whole bunch. I could totally understand that, but also Rourke did pass the ball 24 times, so it wasn't like, the next week against, I forget who they faced in week 2 as an FCS team, but that was a game where Rourke only threw the ball 17 times. Like, 24 times is a decent amount of throwing, especially when you consider later on he's averaging about, 30-ish passes per game. And so I am concerned that Rourke's going to have one of his lower outputs this weekend. So I would personally be trying to sit Rourke and find a different option for this week. What do you think, Justin?
Yeah, well, I'm in agreement with a lot of what you said. I mean, Nebraska is a level of defense that Indiana has not seen yet this season. And in Indiana, I mean, kudos to Cignetti and what they've done in year one. It is quite impressive, but with the caveat, and you touched on it, the schedule so far has been quite weak. Rourke has been a pleasant surprise this year. But as you said, when he's done well, it's been against fairly weak opponents. I'm not sure what to expect when they play Nebraska, who are actually pretty solid on defense. I personally, I had Rourke rostered in my home league, and I dropped him for this week. So just to show, I am in agreement there with Jared. I'm not expecting Rourke to have a great week this week versus Nebraska.
Yeah, and I did want to check one more thing, and it is at Indiana, so that does help Rourke a little bit. If this was at Nebraska, I would be like 5-alarm fire. Like, this could end up being quite poor for him. Justin, which quarterback are you sitting in the top 40?
Yeah, well, it's another one that hits kind of close to home. So Hoover's a guy that I drafted in my home league, and I have him rostered still. And I hope he has a great week, but I'm not expecting him to. So Hoover and TCU play Utah this weekend, and albeit this is not the same level of a Utah team that you typically see year in, year out there with Whittingham, but the defense is still not too shabby. And in particular, I would say Hoover, disturbingly, as a shareholder of his in my home league, has now thrown 2 interceptions for 3 straight weeks. Sort of becoming a trend now, a disturbing trend to say the least. And so, if you're in a league where you're not penalized for turnovers, maybe it's not so bad. But in most leagues, you're going to get minus points for those turnovers, and it's a killer, really. And they're playing a Utah team who, again, they're pretty solid on defense. So with Hoover, I don't love this matchup this week. I was already sort of nervous about him just because in the last few weeks, he hasn't been as good. He's been turning the ball over, like I said, quite a bit. So he's a player, again, we're choosing players within the top 40. There's a lot of players on bye week. You have to choose a name, but Hoover's one where I'm a little bit nervous about this week.
I can speak personally to the fact that I am sitting Hoover in a couple of leagues where I just have some better options at quarterback. Usually it's like a start 2 quarterback league. I can usually find 2 other guys that I'm a bit more okay with here. Obviously, like I said, the 2 interceptions thing, they can't go on forever. The good news for Hoover fans like myself and you, right, there is a pretty long leash there at TCU because who are they going to go to? Ken Seals at Vanderbilt? Like, they're not going to they're not going to go any further with Seals than they will with Hoover, so they're going to keep Hoover out there for a long time. So I'm not worried about a benching here, but once again, I don't expect at all for him to have a great day against this Utah defense. And if I remember correctly, is this at Utah? It is at Utah at 10:30 at night. So you're playing across the time zone there. It's already a late game. I'm very much, and it's a low scoring game, over under of 49.5. Just a lot of things kind of going against Hoover's way here. So I like the call here. Let's move on to running backs here. We'll start with my running back, and that is Mr. Tawi Walker, running back of Wisconsin, which sounds freaking crazy considering what he has been doing the last couple of weeks. Again, ever since Ches Malusi has left the team, Walker's been going absolutely nuts. Again, 19 carries, 94 yards, and 3 touchdowns against Purdue. Last week, 24 carries, almost 200 yards, and 3 touchdowns versus Rutgers. Like, wowee. Like, how in the world could I justify myself in saying that it is a decent chance that you are going to want to sit Walker, or at least consider other options this week? To which I say, I have the same excuse as Justin, where, listen, we only got so many options in the top 40. But also, there is legit reason to be concerned here, right? Very similar to Rourke, this matchup against Northwestern is kind of sneaky tough for running backs. They're currently number 7 in the country, according to C2C Winning Edge's numbers, in defensive team performance against the rush. And again, that's what, and it's bared out in the numbers here, right? Northwestern so far this year has not allowed a running back to go above 70 yards against them to this point in the season, none of whom have been able to score multiple touchdowns against them. Now, Walker's great. I think Walker is a talented enough back, and the system's good enough here where I think he could break that. But it is something to definitely consider here, especially when Northwestern, kind of like the opposite basically of FIU, they're susceptible versus the pass. So maybe Wisconsin comes into this game with a plan to try to attack Northwestern through the air a little bit more, and they lean on Locke and the receivers this game rather than on Walker. On top of everything else, another low over-under game, over-under of 40.5 here. Wisconsin's team total is only 23.5, so you got basically 3 chances to score with Walker, which I think he can score at least once. But even still, there is concern on my end that touchdown regression is coming for Walker here, right? He scored 8 touchdowns in his last 3 games. Like, that can't last forever, right? Unless you're Dylan Sampson. So I think that, yes, I'm stretching here a little bit, but it is something to concern. Like, I have looked in the leagues where I'm starting Walker, and I don't want to bench him, but like, I did take a longer look at my bench and to see if I potentially had some better options. What do you think about this, Justin?
Yeah, I mean, I hear what you're saying, and yeah, this is a tough week to choose top 40 running backs to sit. So, it's always going to be a tough argument. With Walker, I understand what you're saying. Personally, I wouldn't want to sit him this week, but it's the same for the player I chose, right? Like with Braden Sloan, and maybe I'll segue into it now. You know, I wouldn't really want to sit him this week, but for the purpose of this exercise, Ball State and Braden Sloan are playing Vanderbilt. And Sloan, who's been great every time Ball State is in a competitive game, but he's it's quite night and day in terms of when you look at his prior production.
Mm-hmm.
In games where they're not competitive, it's very bad, and then in games where it is competitive, he's quite good. This is one where, okay, on the face of it, it's like MAC team playing an SEC team. This could get rough, and Vanderbilt is actually pretty good this year. At the same time, everything I know about Vanderbilt, they lost to Georgia State earlier this year, albeit that was in like week 2 or something. So clearly they've gotten better, as most teams do. But this is one where I'm looking at it similar to like the Mon Claiborne last week, where it's like I wouldn't love to sit him, but in terms of the logic, he could be in a bad game script, and it could just be really tough, despite the fact that he's going to get a lot of touches. So he might still get the carries, but the efficiency might be so poor, and he might not score any touchdowns. To where you're looking at less than 10 points, or something along those lines, and so. Braden Sloan, Ball State running back, is one where I'm looking at, and if you're somebody who really needs to win this week, you might want to take a second look right at that matchup versus Vandy, and see what else is available.
Yeah, looking at the numbers from Vegas here, right? One, Vandy's favored by 26 points, which I didn't even know was illegal. But again, total here does leave some room a little bit for Ball State to score some points here. It's a total of 58.5, which isn't like astronomical or anything like that. But when you kind of break down the team totals that come out of that leaves Ball State roughly about 16, 17 points. So there's some chances for some scores here from Braden Sloan. But I also agree with you, right? Like, when Ball State loses, they freaking lose. It is not a like outside of their game against MAC competition, right? Like when they're overpowered, man, it gets ugly so dang quick. And we've seen Sloan struggle in both those games. Now, granted, against James Madison, he still got the production, right? 72 yards on 14 carries. Maybe I think that's your best case scenario here. He falls into the end zone. And you're looking at maybe a 14-ish point fantasy day.
Yeah.
Otherwise, like I think if you're starting Sloan, you're starting him knowing you're getting a low ceiling with a potentially even lower floor. And I think that's a bad way to go about it.
Yep.
So let's move on to wide receivers. Let's hit up my wide receiver that I'm sitting this week. And some of y'all are tired of me bringing up this man's name, but I'm sorry. We keep getting bad matchups with him, and I think he's worth sitting. And that is Pat Bryant, wide receiver out of Illinois. Yes, I am. Like I said, I'm digging back into this well. But again, there's so many things that are culminating in this moment for Pat Bryant, right? Low scoring game. If I remember correctly, the total is well into the low 40s, if not a little bit. Hold on, let me type that. Here we go. Yes, 43.5 is the total here. So low scoring game. Michigan's pass defense is 24th in the country, right? Their rushing defense is even better. Illinois is going to struggle to score in this game, right? Pat Bryant, I've been talking about him as a touchdown regression candidate for a while now. Clearly, that is a role that he has in this offense. They look for him in the end zone, especially on the outside there, right? But even so, I fully expect it to continue to regress, right? He's only had one touchdown in the last 2 weeks. And then on top of everything else, like, again, Michigan, just by the numbers, yeah, they're 24th in the country versus the pass. But even at a more minute detail, they're going to have Will Johnson, one of the best cornerbacks, if not the best cornerbacks in the country playing today in college ball, covering Pat Bryant, right? And Pat Bryant has done very well against certain levels of competition. I do not know that Pat Bryant can truly succeed when he has a potential NFL corner, first-round NFL corner, draped all over him. So I'm expecting a rough day from Pat Bryant here. Justin, your thoughts?
Yeah, well, maybe I'll have to speak for the people here. What does Jared have against Pat Bryant? I mean, well, he keeps showing up, but Project Pat, as I like to call him, I have him rostered in my home league. He's been good for my squad so far this year. The man just keeps scoring touchdowns in overtime. I don't know what it is about Illinois, but they keep going to overtime, and Pat Bryant keeps scoring in overtime. Obviously, that's not really something you want to rely on. And to Jared's point, when Illinois has played some of their tougher teams, Penn State, for example, who's the other one? Oh, Kansas, who actually are decent on defense. Pat Bryant, those were sort of the games where he kind of laid the dud. The other games where he scored pretty good points were Eastern Illinois, which is like an FCS team, Central Michigan, which is a MAC team. But he does have that game against Nebraska, right, where Illinois actually won that one. And
that was an impressive performance. I'll give him that one.
Yeah, and his patented two-score performance on the day, right? So he didn't score in overtime in that one, but he scored his patented two scores. Yeah, I like Pat Bryant. I don't know if I'm fully on board. I guess it depends. Again, it's always nuanced of what other options you have out there. And the point that you made about Will Johnson probably being the player who's going to be covering him, I think that's a good one. So it could be ugly for Pat Bryant in this game if Johnson just covers him up. But as you mentioned, he does sort of have that defined role on that team in terms of he's like a touchdown merchant. Anytime they get into sort of the 30, 40-yard area of the other team's end zone, they're kind of looking for him, right? So, I don't want to say I fully disagree with you on this one, but he's a guy where I don't mind starting him this week. Although Michigan's defense is ranked pretty strongly this year, overall they're not that great of a team. I don't know why they're still ranked, and their offense is so poor that like Illinois might get so many cracks at it.
They kept them ranked so that CBS could have a ranked matchup so that they don't have to cry themselves in a corner as ESPN has both Alabama, Tennessee, and Georgia, Texas.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, political reasons, perhaps. I'm not going to refute that. But yeah, I mean, it's not actually a great Michigan team this year, but on defense, they are still pretty good. So I can see it both ways. I don't want to say I fully disagree with you, but I do. Maybe this is the one where I'm not fully on board.
What about your wide receiver that you're sitting here?
Yeah, so Brendan Presley, Oklahoma State, they play BYU this week. They're coming off a bye. Oklahoma State offense, just as a whole, I don't really know what's going on. The whole team just doesn't seem to be gelling correctly right now. It's not just Ollie Gordon, although everybody is sort of focused on what is going on with him, but even the passing game, right? So Presley started off the year pretty strongly. Um, yeah, I'm pulling up his stats here. One moment. Yeah, he started off the year quite strongly. I mean, he actually had a game of 19 targets week 2 against Arkansas. First 4 games, he never scored less than 13.4 points. Last 2 games, though, you're looking at 10 points and 6.3. Now, granted, he still had 14 targets against Kansas State 2 weeks ago, which is still pretty good. But overall, I don't know really what to make of Oklahoma State's offense. They're playing a tough defense, and a surprisingly tough defense. I mean, BYU is actually quite good this year.
Yep.
I don't know. I didn't picture myself saying that out loud in 2024 because their beat writers, their own beat writers in the offseason were not very optimistic about this team coming into 2024. But to everybody's surprise, they're actually quite good. And on defense, in particular, they're quite good. Um, Granted, Mike Gundy and his Pokes are coming off a bye week, so they might have concocted something and come up with a nice game plan. But Brendan Presley, I'm just not that high on this week. There's other receivers there, Stribling, Sean Owens, who could just as easily, if they're going to score through the air, those guys could be the guys. We're still waiting. It could be any week now that Ollie Gordon gets going and just sort of takes on a lot of those scores. At least, those of us who have shares of his are holding out hope at least. So Presley's the name I'm choosing of the top 40, receivers this week. Again, there's a lot of players on bye, so there's not that many to choose from. But Presley's is one that I think could sort of disappoint this weekend.
We're going to find out just how powerful headbutting a cow can make a head coach. You have any idea what I'm talking about?
No, I'm trying to figure it out.
Apparently, Mike Gundy headbutted a cow during the bye week.
Oh,
And he got injured because of it.
oh, wow. Okay.
The
Well,
most Mike Gundy thing ever.
yeah. Well, now I'm even more confident in my pick to sit Presley because this is bizarre behavior. Although Gundy's known for bizarre
He
behavior.
didn't do it on purpose, to be fair. Like it was an accident. But I will say, Mike Gundy is like the king of coaches that know how to hit that very fine line between getting fired and not getting fired.
I
Where
know.
like he toes that line so far in that he just doesn't give a crap, and then when he needs to turn it on, he just does it out of nowhere, right? Like the same year where they got absolutely destroyed by South Alabama, and everybody's talking about like, all right, Mike Gundy's done. He then turns it around, has Ollie Gordon get a borderline Heisman season in the second half of the season. They go to the Big 12 championship, and everybody's like, "Oh my God, all is forgiven." And then he just lays a complete egg in the Big 12 championship, and then it's right back to, well, Oklahoma State's not super great all of a sudden.
No, I know, and he always comes through in the most like unexpected moments, right? Like this would be a week against a tough defense coming off a bye in Oklahoma State that hasn't been that good. All the reasons that I just explained previously. This would be the week where Gundy and his offense just figure it out and have a massive day.
Yeah.
So maybe I'm just hedging my bets there, but it's a very on-brand Gundy thing to where they just destroy BYU coming out of a bye week.
Alrighty, let's move on over to some of these fan submitted start sit questions. Again, we're running a little behind here, so we'll probably go through these just a little bit quicker. But we got some shorter questions here today. First one comes to us from Coach Reed at CPA_Cougar. He's asking us to pick between the two triple option quarterbacks of the year right now. Blake Horvath going up against Charlotte this weekend, or Bryson Daly going up against East Carolina. I do this week have our C2C projections here to let you guys know what they have to say. I also have my own projections that I'm not publishing yet, but I am currently working on, and you guys can get a little sneak preview here of what those are looking like. According to C2C projections here, they favor Bryson Daly with 25.24 fantasy points, Horvath with 24.87. My projections are in love with Horvath here. 41.9 fantasy points projected here in this game, with Daly there at 32.1. So obviously good options either way. But I'm going to go with Horvath here out of these two. he going up against Charlotte has good matchups both against the run and the pass, right? Charlotte's passing defense is 102nd versus the pass. Their rushing defense is 119th in the country. They can take advantage of it in both ways, right? And that offense in general is more suited to take advantage of one or the other if Charlotte tries to take away the run or tries to take away the pass, right? They can be multiple. Versus Daly is actually kind of walking into a pretty sneakily tough matchup here against East Carolina. Don't be wrong, East Carolina is not a great team here. And if I remember correctly, let me see if I can find their game here. Yeah, Army's favored by 15 points here. So, like, Vegas doesn't think that Army's going to have much of a problem with East Carolina here. But East Carolina's rushing defensive performance so far this year is 27th in the country. And, yeah, their passing is 78th, but Army doesn't have quite the passing game that Navy does currently. And so I'm a bit more concerned that if East Carolina is successful in taking away a good portion of the run game from Army here, that there's not really a plan B from Army. And that could end up being a rougher day for Daly than anticipated. Now, again, my projections have him at 32.1 fantasy points. We're still expecting a good day from Daly here. But if you're asking me to pick between these two, I'm going with Horvath. Justin, your thoughts, man?
Yeah, well, first of all, let me just say I love that this person has both of these quarterbacks on their team. I was just wondering about that the other day of like how many managers have both of these players this season. That's pretty sick. Um, and both have great matchups this week. As you know, most of what Jared said or all of what Jared said, I'm in agreement. Horvath, he has the benefit of being more of an actual dual threat QB. He attempts double digit passes and double digit runs per game. Whereas Daly, I would say, is more of that classic sort of option quarterback where, he's toting the rock like 20 plus times a game, which is pretty effective as we saw last week against UAB. I'm gonna have to agree here with Jared, although it's really not like again, both of these players, I would love to start both of them. Obviously this league must be start one QB because if it's start two QB, both of these guys have to be locked in immediately.
Or he
But
has like John Mateer or something like that as his other quarterback.
which, geez, yeah, have mercy on his league opponents. At that point, just hand him the CFF championship, right? What are we even talking about? So I'm going to roll with Horvath. I like that he has both that pass and run element to his game, whereas Daly's a little bit more one-dimensional. And Jared mentioned it in terms of the matchup, how that sort of looks with ECU's defense versus Charlotte's defense. So, yeah, unfortunate. I have to agree with Jared here.
I love how it's every time it's unfortunately you have to agree with me. No, I totally understand.
Just trying to create some controversy here.
We love some controversy around here. Let's go to John Ludovina's question here at J_Luda here. He's asking us to pick two running backs in a non-PPR format between Dean Connors, running back out of Rice, going up against Tulsa, Avery Morrow, the running back out of Colorado State, going up against Air Force this week, or we can go with RJ Harvey, running back out of UCF, going up against Iowa State. So, Justin, I'll throw it over to you first, man, on this one. Which two are you starting here? I guess maybe the better question is, which one are you sitting of these three?
Well, yeah. So my first player that I'm starting is Dean Connors for Tulsa. I like that matchup. I like Connors' role in Rice's offense. I feel pretty solidly about where he stands there. Really liked what I've seen with Avery Morrow in the last couple of weeks in terms of his role there with CSU. And they're playing an Air Force team who are not as good as Air Force typically is this year. And then RJ Harvey, who was monstrous the start of the year. It's cooled off a little bit recently, right? And they're playing ISU, who this is one of Matt Campbell's good years. He's one of those coaches kind of oscillates up and down, and this is one of their good seasons, evidently. And ISU, particularly on defense, looked to be pretty solid, pretty stout there. It's tough for me to choose between all three. I think are good. I wouldn't want to have to sit any of these players. But you look at that UCF offense. Well, I'll put it this way. So with Morrow, he got banged up last week, but then he returned to the game and he had a great game. So I assume he's fully healthy, and that's, I guess, my caveat here is I'm assuming Morrow, because he returned last week, had a great game, that he's fully healthy. If something comes out, obviously, that he's questionable or something, then this makes this question much easier. With RJ Harvey, they had a switch at quarterback. Offense is kind of, a little bit in flux. But I love his role in the offense. We've seen what he can do in that offense. He's put up monstrous performances already this year. So it's very tough for me to choose between both of these players. But I think I'm gonna roll narrowly with Avery Morrow. He's been hot recently. I don't know. I just feel like UCF versus ISU could get really tough for UCF's players, and just feels like ISU might be able to key in on RJ Harvey and really commit to stopping him, with not having to respect maybe much else about that UCF offense. But look, I mean, I think Harvey could have a great day as well. It's not that like I think he's an automatic sit. It's just that we have to choose two.
Yeah, and I agree with you. This is a very, very tough question. A very, very, very good job presenting this one, John, here. Again, like, it is no PPR, so that does hurt Connors a little bit in this scenario, right? I think that'll take away some pointers that you would normally kind of be able to rely on with him, because he's not a guy that you hand the ball off to 20 times a game. He's very much one of those, 10 targets, 10 catches kind of deal, or at the very least 15 carries, 5 to 6
Right.
targets kind of deal. The matchup here is very nice, both against the run and especially against the pass, right? But also, I'm not entirely sure if I trust this Rice offense. Like, of these three offenses, I think Rice is the one in general that I probably trust the least. They are getting better, but man, they've been off to a rough start this year. But Connors' role is very clear, and I think he'll be fine mostly with like production wise. Morrow, I think, is easily, of these three, the safe option. I like the matchup against Air Force. Their defense is very bad compared to how they normally are. They're 96th in the country versus the run in terms of team performance. So I am definitely starting Avery Morrow of these three guys just as a very safe option. And because I have Morrow there as a kind of safe play, I think I will swing for the fences on RJ Harvey here, right?
Mm.
He's been phenomenal this year, right? He's RB4 on the season. Yeah, his last couple of weeks haven't been, phenomenal, but even still, like last week, he got, even though he didn't, like he had his lowest output of the season at 13.5 fantasy points, it's only because he just didn't find the end zone. He had 17 attempts, 94 yards, 2 catches, 31 yards. He had the RJ Harvey production that you normally see. It's just that UCF's offense could only put up 13 points on the day, right? There weren't a ton of scoring opportunities. Now, that could be a concern again this weekend. This is a low over-under game, 48.5. ISU favored by 14 points. So again, that leaves you with, like maybe 17 points for UCF to really go with here. But I also think there's a chance that UCF's offense could look much better this weekend than it did last weekend, where they know who their quarterback is coming in. I don't know what nonsense they were trying to do last week by starting the true freshman, and then one drive later they put in Ja'Cory Brown. I don't know what was going on there. But even still, I'm expecting a better performance here. RJ Harvey has been RJ Harvey for a reason, and I think I will roll with him. And Connors, with it being a non-PPR format, I think he'll kind of get knocked here. Projections-wise, our C2C projections agree with Justin, or actually disagree with both of us. It actually has Avery Morrow as the lowest, and my projections actually agree with it as well, with 18.72 versus 18.1 points for Avery Morrow. But that's both just below the projections for Dean Connors, which has him at 18.94 and 18.7 in my projections. And my projections assume half-point PPR. So again, you're probably looking at a couple of points down from there. So then it kind of agrees with me, I guess. And both of our projections still expect RJ Harvey to have a nice weekend this weekend. C2C projections have him at 20.2 fantasy points. My projections have him at 24.5. So lower than his average, but still a pretty solid day at the end of the day. So I'll roll with that. I'm happy with it. I'm starting Morrow and Harvey here, sitting Connors. Put those back. Move on to our third question of the night, and that comes to us from Mr. Jackson, at Jackson Birming 2 on Twitter. He is asking us between two running backs here, Braden Sloan, running back out of Ball State, going up against Vandy, or Quali Conley, running back out of Arizona, going up against Colorado this weekend. Justin, we already know that you already listed Sloan as your sit for this week, so I guess this will be a pretty short answer from you real quick.
Yeah, well, I suppose my previous answer is binding here, right? Again, I could see the path for Sloan. As I said in the sit, there is a possibility, of course, that like because again, he sees usage in the air too, and it could be the case where he gets a bunch of targets in PPR. Qualey Conley, though, he's been good this year, especially given that Ja'Cory Merritt got ruled ineligible earlier on in the season. So that was a nice boon for him. He's clearly the RB1 there at Arizona now. And he's another one where it's like he doesn't see 20 carries per game, but when you add in the targets and the receptions that he gets, he's still getting 20 touches per game, which I do like. And they play Colorado this week, which Colorado typically is a good matchup for CFF fireworks because they're great on offense, defense not so great. So, yeah, I guess I have to roll with Conley.
Yeah, I feel like you're under obligation here, given your answer earlier. I'm gonna go Conley as well, but I think it's a little closer than we're kind of giving credit for here, right? One, Colorado's defense, for as much as I rag on them, their defense actually is quite improved this year. Like you're talking about last year, they were bottom like 20 in the country at best. This year, overall, their defense, according to our numbers at C2C Winning Edge here, you got total defense is 49th in the country, passing defense 74th, and rushing is 47th. None of those are elite, but they're a mile ahead compared to where they were last year. So it's not quite the automatic start that we were kind of looking at last year. But I still think I'm going to roll with Conley. I think I'm going to roll with the guy that is, like I said, consistent volume, not really it's not like a elite level of volume, but at least he's playing his level of competition. So I think that kind of provides a safer floor out of these two guys. So I'll go with Conley, and I just realized I have your tokens mixed up here. So let's get those right. Yeah, I don't really got much else to say here. Pretty much the same thought process as you. So I spend all that time putting the tokens in the right place, and I immediately put them back. Let's move on to our fourth question of the night. This one comes to us from YouTube at Joshua Jeff Coat 2999. If you're watching this on the YouTube side of things, make sure you leave some start-sit questions for me whenever I release my waiver wire shows. I look in those comments as well in order to find questions for the show, including Joshua's question here, where he's asking us to pick between three wide receivers here. Dane Key out of Kentucky going up against Florida. Jordan Moore, wide receiver out of Duke, going up against FSU. Or we can go with Kyle Williams, the wide receiver out of Washington State, going up against Hawaii. He's, again, asking us to pick for one. It is a non-PPR format. 6-point passing and 6-point receiving and rushing touchdowns here. So when I look at these three guys, I think the first one that I'm sitting out of the bunch is Jordan Moore. I think I'm just tired of the inconsistency. He started off really, really nice, multiple 100-yard games to start the year. I was sitting there thinking like, all right, we got one of our top end volume receivers. There's nobody else in this offense that they can really throw to. Well, turns out as the weeks go on, they've got other guys that they can throw to. And with that, Moore has been fading a little bit and is just now very inconsistent. 73, 34, 80, and 23 yards are his production for the last couple of weeks. And he's been about 50-50 on whether or not he'll get a touchdown. He hasn't scored a touchdown since week 3. So, yeah, I am going to be sitting Jordan Moore first of these three. And then among the last two, right, I think I'm going to lean towards Dane Key, mostly due to the fact that he's had some really nice, consistent volume over the last 3 weeks. Again, it's pretty clear that him and Vandergriff have created a nice connection here. 10-plus targets in each of his last 3 games, 100-plus in 2 out of those 3 games, a touchdown in 2 out of those 3 games. Anything elite? No, but in half PPR formats, you're basically locked in 18 points over the last 3 weeks with him. And then you got Williams, who I like Williams, don't get me wrong, but he's kind of fighting between himself and Chris Hudson and Josh Meredith in terms of who's going to be the favorite target of John Mateer each week. And given the fact that Hawaii's passing defense isn't good, but it's not atrocious either, I think I'd rather go ahead and take the shot on a clear number one guy in Dane Key. So that's who I'm going to start of these three, and I'll be sitting Mr. Kyle Williams. Justin, who are your guys here?
Yeah, well, I'll cut right to the chase. I'm in agreement. Dane Key would be my guy. I like Jordan Moore. I had a lot of shares of him this offseason. Had to cut him last week going into his bye, just given the just yeah, lately his performance has sort of been down. Even to start the year, right? I mean, he had great performances, but they should have been so much better, when you account for the drops,
Mm-hmm.
multiple drops in the end zone. So, even in those first couple weeks when he had good output, should have been so much higher. And now, over the last couple of weeks, you see other guys like Eli Pankel, I think his name is something along
Mm-hmm.
those lines. He's another one who sees a lot of targets. Other guys are emerging there. So, and Dane Key, he really has emerged as the alpha player, really amongst the skill players for Kentucky, despite sort of shoddy QB play. He continues to get it done. He's clearly Brock Vandergrift's favorite target, and we have 3 straight weeks now of great production from him.
Yep.
And I like that matchup against Florida, right? It's going to be a close game. Florida and Kentucky, they always, Kentucky always seems to get the better of Florida. At least they have recently. And it's usually a pretty good game in the SEC. So, I think that's a great game in terms of recipe for CFF goodness. So I'm in agreement. I'm rolling with Key.
Yeah, let me check out that game real quick. What is the over under in that game? It is. Where's Florida? So many Florida teams. There we go. 42 and a half. A pick 'em. So I don't love that for CFF purposes, but again, when it comes to just a pure alpha, I'm willing to take the risk on that. According to our projections, both my own and C2C projections, both Justin and I are going against the grain here. Our C2C projections actually favor Jordan Moore, but barely among these three options. Moore has 13.99, Williams has 13.91, and Dane Key has 12.44. So these guys are all right next to each other in our projections. My own projections has a little bit more of a gap between the three. It actually favors Kyle Williams of these three with 16.4. Dane Key's got 14.3, and then Jordan Moore is at the bottom with 13.4. So interesting how the humans disagree from the model and the model disagrees from the other model. So with our last question here, let's head on over to that. Another question from YouTube, and this one comes to us, from William1712, again on YouTube. He's asking us to pick between three wide receivers here. Antonio Williams, wide receiver at Clemson, going up against Virginia this week, or we can go Pat Bryant, wide receiver out of Illinois, going up against Michigan, or we can go with Aaron Anderson, the wide receiver at LSU, going up against Arkansas. So Justin, your turn to start. I'll throw it over to you, man.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess the shoe's on the other foot here, where you'll be obligated to sit Pat Bryant. So I guess we kind
I'm
of
already putting my token up.
gotcha. So yeah, I mean, all three of these players, I like all three this week. Actually, as I mentioned with Jared in his sit conversation, that did not fully in agreement on sitting Pat Bryant this week. Although I understand some of the trepidation with the Will Johnson matchup there because he is a good cornerback. Probably will be the one guarding Pat Bryant. Aaron Anderson is pretty definitively the wide receiver two there for LSU. Antonio Williams, he seems to be the primary target there at Clemson, and that is an offense that really has emerged right this year of Kate Klubnik. To everyone's surprise, right? I mean, Kate Klubnik's actually in the Heisman race now. He keeps throwing touchdowns. They can't be stopped, apparently. And I like their matchup this week against Virginia. I'm actually gonna start Pat Bryant against Michigan, just to go against Jared. No, I mean,
You had me dropping my mouth open a little bit here. I was like, what?
yeah, well, I'm gonna start Pat Bryant. I'm swinging for the fences here. I like Pat Bryant a lot. I mean, I know he keeps scoring in overtime, but I don't know. It's not the same sort of level of Michigan team this year. I get it. Their defense is still solid, but on offense, they just can't get anything going usually, and that could mean a lot of swings for Illinois. So I'm gonna roll with Pat Bryant here. Although look, all three actually I actually still like. I mean, there's the margin for me is not that high, not that large between any of them. I'd be happy to start all three of them, but I'm gonna take a risk here. I'm gonna go with Pat Bryant.
Oh, so you were serious about actually starting Pat Bryant? Wow. No, I'm being mean now. But to me, like if they really are all three this close, right? Like, would the defensive matchup just by the numbers not be kind of a bit of a tiebreaker here? Like, I guess what about Pat Bryant? I guess maybe the role with him scoring so many touchdowns, maybe
Yeah,
is that enough in your mind to overstate or to overcome? In my opinion, like looking at the defensive numbers, I'll get into those here in a second. Like Michigan's easily the toughest matchup for receivers out of these three. So I guess I'll just ask you: is that enough for you to? I guess it is enough for you to to overcome here.
yeah. Well, I mean, Aaron Anderson is the wide receiver. He's really the third option there because the tight end is the second leader in targets. So he's sort of the wide receiver three for LSU. Granted, that's still a good role because they pass the ball a lot. Antonio Williams seems to be more of the primary receiver for Clemson. I mean, I could have easily chosen him as well. It was sort of more of a toss up. It's not a definitive sort of pick for me. I'm also trying to keep this interesting, keep this
Hmm.
lively for the audience, right? But I am also not just picking Pat Bryant just for the sake of doing it. His role is pretty defined in that offense. They go to him when they're near the end zone. I like the targets he sees. But Antonio Williams is another one where okay, he's the primary receiver for Clemson. They've been scoring a lot, and they have a good matchup against Virginia. I suspect that's probably who you'll pick. I could have easily sort of made the argument there for him as well. But definitely, if I'm choosing of these three, I'd rather choose the players who are definitely the primary receiver. So it's either Antonio Williams or Pat Bryant. Again, yeah, you can make the argument tiebreaker, Michigan defense, fair enough. But certainly, I think Aaron Anderson is the one I'm not picking just because he's third in targets on his own team there. So yeah, I'd rather just go with players who I know are definitively wide receiver one, the go-to guy.
Well, I'm gonna pick Aaron Anderson because I'm gonna go against you. No, I am being serious. I am picking Aaron Anderson of these three, and I'm sitting in Antonio Williams here. Antonio Williams is kind of tough because, like on paper, like you said, right, you got a high scoring offense. He seems to be the number one guy, right? A good matchup against UVA. We assume that Clemson's going to be able to take care of business there, right? But then I actually go back and look, and his target numbers and production numbers aren't as like fantastic as I really thought they would be. Again, I liked what he did against Florida State, right, where he got the 2 carries as well for 36 yards, finished the day with 84 yards and a touchdown. That was pretty solid. Like, don't get me wrong, but for me, 4 targets, 6 targets, and 7 targets just isn't as mind blowing as I thought it would be. Meanwhile, Aaron Anderson, it's like I feel like I know exactly what I'm getting with him at this point, right? 6 to 7 to 8 targets, roughly 60 to a high of 100 yards against or 96 yards for South Carolina, but most likely you're getting somewhere between 60 and 85-ish yards, and you got a 50-50 shot at a touchdown. And to me, like that is the highest floor of each of these guys here. And I think when you're kind of making these decisions between guys like this, I think you're gonna have to go for the floor play there. And so that's kind of where I am leaning towards. Again, he didn't specify if this is PPR or not in this league, but if it is PPR, then I'm definitely leaning towards Aaron Anderson.
Yeah, PPR helps Aaron Anderson's profile. One thing I will say about Williams and all of Clemson's skill players is they've been in so many blowouts this year
Agreed.
that like, their volume and their input volume is a little bit misleading. Like Antonio Williams had like 2 touchdowns against NC State in the first like 10 minutes of that game, and then he just like was out of the game like midway through the second quarter, right? So like there's some games in there where I'm sure he would have seen more targets if they like needed him, but similar to like Phil Maffa, like the game was over at like halftime.
Yeah.
Yeah, but look, I agree with a lot of what you were saying too in your argument there. So this will be an interesting one, right? Like at the say the
Agreed.
least come back next week. Jared's sitting Pat Bryant. I've chosen Pat Bryant in this question. We'll see what happens.
We will definitely find out. I'm ready for Pat Bryant to make me a fool again because I've said to sit him before, and then he goes and scores his patent 2 touchdowns again.
Well, if it goes to overtime, yes, he's going to score a touchdown. If it
Dude,
doesn't go to overtime, he's having it done.
I will text you immediately if this game goes to overtime. I'll be like, well, here comes the Pat Bryant touchdown. I will say real quick, projections. I almost forgot this. My projections, the C2C projections differ from each other. My projections actually have Antonio Williams as the favorite here. They got him at 15.8 fantasy points. Pat Bryant at 14.5, and Anderson actually completely disagrees with me, down at 12.7. And then among the C2C projections, they have Aaron Anderson as the highest one at 16.47. Antonio Williams right behind him at 16.23, with Pat Bryant bringing up the rear at 14.92. So clearly all three of these guys very, very close together. But I'm personally leaning towards the floor play that I see in Aaron Anderson versus I think VP is going for the more of the ceiling.
Yeah, and I'm curious why the models differ. Do you know sort of the inner workings of what they sort of weight?
I know the inner workings of my model. I
Yeah.
don't know all the inner workings of the C2C model. I should learn that at some point just so that I can actively explain it to people. And I can explain the differences between the two. The one thing I could really say is that I have a feeling that there's probably some different defensive metrics that are being used to like determine like how much how or what we can expect the fantasy points look like. I know that both of these models are fantasy points based models rather than breaking it down by stats, because we just don't have we don't have access to those live stats like that. So I couldn't really tell you right now. Maybe I'll learn that by next week.
No, that's fine. I was just curious. And maybe next week or some later week. Yeah.
So, yeah. With that being said, we come to the end of our show. Went a little longer than we normally do with these start-sit shows, but it was tons of great conversations here today, so I'm not mad about it whatsoever. Justin, before we get out of here, man, again, you're doing your weekly articles right now. Anything else that you want to throw out to the folks?
No. Yeah, as you mentioned, weekly articles. On a little bit of a hiatus from publishing on C2C. Workload is too high at the moment, but in the off season, I'll return to publishing both at Camps to Kin and on my website. So hopefully see you all there, and look forward to chatting CFF again next week, Jared.
Sure. And on my side of things, obviously we got the 2 CTN shows every week. I got a weekly article for Waiver Wires that comes out each week. Make sure you check out the latest episode of Defending the Natty with myself and Nate Marquise, where we discuss mid-season trading in CFF Dynasty Leagues. There's a ton of great conversation, so go check that out. And in addition, I will make the official announcement here that we are currently working towards getting rest of season rankings and projections onto campus2canton.com. I've had that requested from a ton of people. You'll be able to sort by both fantasy points per game and total fantasy points, whichever way you want to look at it, right? We'll provide both of that for you. You'll see the top 48 quarterbacks, the top 60 running backs, top 72 wide receivers, and the top 24 tight ends on there. So it won't be like our normal projections where you can look up any player that you want and see what those projections look like. You'll just get a certain number at the top each week. So that's just all we can do for right now with this midseason product. Maybe going into next year, we can expand that a little bit more. But go ahead.
Just let me say one thing before you go through the outro. You mentioned that Defending the Natty episode. Let me just say that is the best show in CFF right now. It's my favorite show. It is must listen, I guess, content. Because you guys don't upload it onto YouTube. It's just a podcast, right?
It is just on the podcast feed.
It's very, very unfortunate. I would like to see the visual, but if audio is all you guys can do, that's fine. But I have to say, my favorite show in the CFF realm right now, somehow Jared carries that third-rate analyst, Nate, on that show. But it is great content, seriously, every week. And anybody who's listening to this should absolutely be making sure they watch that or listen to that podcast every time you guys upload.
Yeah, we upload it monthly. We try to hit it on the 15th of each month. We've been mostly good about that. And it is fantastic content, not just for if you're in a dynasty league or a keeper league, but like if you want to just get ahead of
Yes,
your
exactly.
friends in redraft leagues, right? We start
Yeah,
talking about youngsters, and we start talking about like, all right, what do we expect for these guys going into next year and everything. And it's basically a free way to start getting research in while you're while you're working on this year, getting ahead for next year. So,
absolutely. Yeah.
all right, guys, with all that being said, like I said, we come to the end of the show. Appreciate all of you guys listening. If you have not already, leave a like, a comment, and subscribe if you're watching this on the YouTube side of things. If you're on the podcast, make sure you follow the show, leave a 5-star review wherever you can. Make sure you guys check out the rest of the Campus Canton Podcast Network for shows ranging on pretty much anything you can think of related to the college fantasy game. We'll see you guys back here on Monday for another round of waiver wire players to pick up and get ready for your playoff runs. Until then, really appreciate you guys, and I hope you guys have a wonderful, blessed week. See y'all.